The following is an analysis of the consequences of the connections between natural objects, cultural objects, and human societies. As stated in the textbook Introduction to Theory of Literature, objects studied by literary theory are referred to as cultural objects. The main contrast between a natural object and cultural object is a natural object is that it is the product of human actions. It thus rates remarking, natural objects such as sediment and wildlife, dissimilar to cultural objects, do not require any human participation to exist. There are three consequences of cultural objects: dependence for existence on human activity. The foremost consequence is they are intrinsically linked to human societies and cannot be invented by isolated individuals. Rather, they require a group or society of creators to exist. These include objects such as paintings, sculptures, buildings, poems, and so on. The next consequence, as defined by Ms. Carusi and Professor Oliphant, is all cultural objects features need to satisfy human requirements or desires directly related to the fact that they are spawned by human activities and movements. For instance, tables and chairs were engineered especially to be used by people. Finally, the third consequence is cultural objects such as painting, poems, sculptures, and other art forms are invented with meaning. Furthermore, there are various linguistic and non-linguistic cultural objects, and one of the purposes they are designed to fulfill is the purpose of communication. In particular, road signs visually communicate certain messages to motorists. All in all, cultural objects are subjected to any of the consequences connected to cultural objects. Natural objects do not require any human intervention to come into fruition, whereas cultural objects, manifestations, on the other hand, are meticulously linked to human civilizations. As put forward in the transcript written by Carusi and Oliphant, the word aesthetic is an implicitly evaluative term. Normally, it is used to refer to the best or most highly valuable examples of various types of artistic activity. They also go on to say that the definition of the aesthetic is awkward as a result of two reasons. Firstly, the fundamental requirement of any theory is that the object of the area of study must be clearly defined and must be addressed using lexical resources along with approaches related to the object. Secondly, the aesthetic must be translated as a point of departure due to the fact that the analysis of the aesthetic object is fundamental to literary theory. Carusi and Oliphant allude that the Collins Dictionary defines the term aesthetic as the following: connected with aesthetics or its principles. 2a, relating to pure beauty rather than to other considerations. 2b, artistic or relating to good taste. This implies that we should use the expression when referring to extreme beauty, to artworks, or to exceptional palette. Nevertheless, the crisis arises because there are no pure principles for defining exquisiteness, artwork, or fine taste. Marcia Eaton puts forward a multiplicity of arguments in her book Basic Issues in Aesthetics to explain the difficulties encountered when defining beauty, art, and aesthetic. She says people find themselves in a rather unsavory predicament when asked to bring forward an explanation of exactly what they are referring to in support of their opinions regarding someone or something they find aesthetically pleasing. What she means is one person may find a movie or song stimulating, while another critiques it as dreary. The one individual would point out exceptional aspects of a film or song to prove its worth, only to have those same features used as evidence of its lack of value by the next person, says Eaton. In philosophical aesthetics, as in other areas of philosophy, efforts to describe important lexicon have played a fundamental part, just as much as inquiries regarding how we can adduce that the definitions are valid, and how we can tell if an object fits the definition. She goes on to rate that people simply do not agree about what beauty means. This is why it is so problematic to define the term, and throughout the ages no explanation of the expression has seemed universally acceptable. However, Eaton argues that comprehending the raw essence of aesthetic activity, experience and judgment is much more important than simply disagreeing over the meaning of a word. As a result, key words seem to mean such different things to different people, which calls for an explanation of how communique is conceivable. Aesthetics is occasionally recognized as the philosophy of art, since the practices we recognize as aesthetic are regularly associated with artworks. Therefore, deriving a clear-cut definition for works of art is as grim as the question about the characterization of beauty. Namely, when looking at modern-day fine art, to be specific, it often leaves us at a loss. We do not know how to approach it, let alone evaluate it, as Eaton remarks. Just as troublesome as beauty and art is the term aesthetic. What does it mean to say that someone is having an aesthetic experience or is responding aesthetically? According to Eaton, the word aesthetic only came about in the 18th century, while the antiquity of topics that it speaks of delves deep into history, as that of ethics, logic, metaphysics, and epistemology. The expression was invented in 1750 by Alexander Baumgarten to refer to a special area of philosophy. Baumgarten wanted to produce a science of beauty based upon sense perception, beckoned by Baumgarten's attentiveness to sensory experience. There was a modification of emphasis from things to perception, of things from object to subject. This indicates that the central position of the question, how can we know when things are beautiful or ugly, began to be taken over by the question, what happens when people respond aesthetically? In other words, what Eaton is alluding to is, would it be a fair charge if someone says that a painting is hideous looking? This would indeed warrant as an aesthetic description. Doesn't using it indicate that one is responding aesthetically? It is difficult to be certain whether or not. We and others are demonstrating aesthetic sensitivity, according to Eaton. What counts as aesthetic activity is it enough to look at a painting, or must we study it in a certain way? Does a special emotion or repression of emotion always characterize aesthetic experience? Let us say an artist produces a beautiful or ugly painting. Would it in fact be indicative of his or her personal aesthetic experience? In sum, defining aesthetics, artworks, and even pure beauty in general is indeed troublesome and problematic. This is mainly due to there not being a distinct consensus from all individual viewers and audiences regarding interpretation of aesthetics. The expression aesthetic itself is nonetheless meaningful to humanity as a lexical means for identifying with beauty and our perceptions of art, as well as of the world around us in general.